The country club's chandeliers cast their warm glow over 200 of Westfield's finest pretenders, each clutching champagne flutes like weapons of social warfare. I stood near the mahogany bar, watching my wife Danielle work the room like she owned it, which, considering how much we'd spent on her event planning business networking, she practically did. "Victor, darling, you look positively miserable," chirped Melissa Chan, our neighbor's wife, her phone already positioned for another Instagram story. "Smile, you're at the social event of the season." I forced a grin that felt like swallowing glass. "Just taking it all in, Melissa. Hard to believe how far we've all come." Across the room, Danielle threw her head back in laughter at something Gregory Lane had whispered in her ear. Greg, successful real estate developer, married to Danielle's best friend Sabrina, and apparently my wife's favorite business consultation partner for the past 3 months. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 weeks ago, I'd been organizing our joint credit card statements when I noticed a pattern that made my commercial lease negotiator brain kick into high gear. Lunch meetings at the Ritz-Carlton, planning sessions at the Four Seasons, hotel bar charges at 2 in the afternoon on Tuesdays, the same Tuesdays Danielle claimed she was visiting her sick aunt in Connecticut. I'd done what I do best. I investigated, quietly, methodically. Like tracking down a commercial property's hidden liens, I followed the paper trail. Calendar overlaps between Danielle's client meetings and Greg's site visits. Expense reports that didn't match her claimed locations. Text messages on her unlocked iPad that she'd forgotten to delete. Hope Sabrina doesn't find out about our little secret. Can't wait for Tuesday's meeting at the Marriott. The evidence was overwhelming. My wife of 18 years was having an affair with her best friend's husband, and she wasn't even trying to hide it well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Danielle's voice cut through the cocktail chatter like a blade. She stood on the small stage near the piano, champagne flute raised high, her red dress catching the light. "I want to make a toast." The room quieted. Sabrina Lane beamed up at her best friend from the front row, her arm linked through her husband's. Greg's face had gone slightly pale, but he maintained his practiced smile. "To new beginnings," Danielle announced, her voice carrying that slight slur that meant she'd had one too many. "To throwing off the chains of boring, predictable life. To—" she paused dramatically, her eyes finding mine across the room, "to celebrating my own divorce." The crowd erupted in shocked laughter. Someone whooped. Melissa Chan's phone was undoubtedly capturing every second. "Danielle's so brave," I heard someone whisper, finally admitting what we all knew. About time she dumped that boring husband of hers. She deserves so much better than Victor. The laughter grew louder. Champagne glasses clinked. My wife basked in the attention like a sunbather in July, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just publicly announced her intention to destroy our marriage at a party where half the guests were our mutual friends. But what really got me, what made my jaw clench and my hands ball into fists, was watching Greg Lane's smug smile as he raised his own glass to toast my wife's declaration. The same Greg Lane who'd shaken my hand not 20 minutes earlier and asked about my golf game. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. The crowd parted like I was Moses approaching the Red Sea. Conversations faded mid-sentence. Even the piano player stopped playing. I stopped directly in front of Sabrina Lane, Greg's wife, Danielle's best friend, the woman who'd been in our wedding party, who'd hosted Danielle's baby shower for the child we'd lost, who'd cried with us during my father's funeral. She looked up at me with confusion, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the concern in her eyes. "Sabrina," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Why are you laughing?" Her smile faltered. What do you mean, Victor?" I glanced up at Danielle, still standing on the stage with her champagne flute, her expression shifting from triumphant to uncertain. Then I looked back at Sabrina, and in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, I delivered the words that would detonate like a bomb in the middle of Westfield's social elite. Why laugh? She'll be back with your husband before the night ends. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people holding their breath. Champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. Melissa Chan's phone trembling in her suddenly unsteady hand. Sabrina's face went from confused to pale to a shade of white I'd never seen on a living person. Her eyes darted to her husband, then to Danielle, then back to me. "What? What did you just say?" she whispered. But I was already walking away, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the marble-floored ballroom. Behind me, I heard the first glass shatter against the floor. Then Sabrina's voice, rising to a shriek. "Greg! Greg! What is he talking about?" I didn't turn around. I walked straight through the country club's ornate lobby, past the shocked doorman, and into the cool October night. My phone was already buzzing with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. I had work to do. My home office had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could spread out contracts, review property surveys, and think through complex commercial deals in peace. Tonight, it became my war room. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, ever since I'd first noticed those suspicious credit card charges. The manila folder on my desk contained everything: printed bank statements with highlighted transactions, screenshots of text messages, a timeline I'd constructed showing the overlap between Danielle's business meetings and Greg's property inspections. The most damning piece of evidence sat in a separate envelope: photographs taken by our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lipman. The woman was nosier than a private investigator, but her hobby of documenting suspicious neighborhood activity had finally proved useful. She'd captured Danielle and Greg in a passionate embrace outside the Marriott downtown, complete with timestamps showing it was during one of Danielle's supposed client consultations. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since I'd left the country club 2 hours ago. 17 missed calls from Danielle. 8 from various friends who'd witnessed the scene. 3 from my brother asking if I'd lost my mind. I ignored them all and focused on the task at hand. The package I was preparing would go to Sabrina Lane via overnight delivery. No return address, no note, just the evidence, laid out chronologically, letting the facts speak for themselves. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, calendar screenshots showing GL meetings on Danielle's schedule that coincided perfectly with Greg's mysteriously free afternoons. But the package was only part 1 of my plan. Part 2 involved a phone call to my old friend Eddie Doyle, a detective with the Westfield Police Department, who'd been my drinking buddy since college. "Jesus Christ, Vic," Eddie said when he answered on the second ring. "I heard what happened at the country club tonight. Half the department's wives were at that party. You really dropped that bomb on Sabrina Lane?" I told her the truth, I said, sealing the envelope with Sabrina's address. "Eddie, I need some advice. Hypothetically speaking." "Oh, hell. What kind of hypothetically?" "If someone were to discover evidence of adultery, and if that someone wanted to protect their assets before filing for separation, what would be the cleanest way to do it?" Eddie was quiet for a long moment. "Hypothetically, that someone would want to document everything. Financial records showing misuse of joint funds for the affair, evidence of the adultery itself, and they'd want to move fast before the other party can hide assets or make claims about abuse or abandonment. What about joint accounts? If there's documented evidence that joint funds were used to finance an extramarital affair, the betrayed spouse has grounds to freeze those accounts pending separation proceedings, especially if they can show the funds were used without their knowledge or consent." I looked at the stack of hotel and restaurant receipts on my desk. Every single charge had come from our joint credit card. Danielle had literally been using my money to finance her affair. "Thanks, Eddie. I owe you a beer." "Vic, whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Don't do anything that'll come back to bite you in court." After hanging up, I spent the next 4 hours making copies of everything, organizing files, and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of my life. But first, I had one more call to make. Big Mike's Towing. We haul it all. Mike Kowalski had been my best friend since high school. While I'd gone to college and learned to negotiate commercial leases, Mike had built a successful towing and auto repair business. He was also the most loyal friend a man could ask for. Mike, it's Vic. I need a favor. Anything, brother. What's going on? Remember that red Porsche 911 that belongs to Greg Lane? The one he parks in his driveway like it's a shrine? The real estate douche? Yeah, I know the car. What about it? Tomorrow morning, you're going to get a call from someone reporting it as abandoned on private property, illegally parked, blocking access to a loading dock downtown. Mike was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. You know, now that you mention it, I did see a red Porsche parked illegally near the warehouse district earlier tonight. Terrible shame when people don't respect private property. Terrible shame indeed. Make sure it gets towed to the city impound lot. I hear they're backed up for weeks before owners can reclaim vehicles. Consider it done. But Vic, this wouldn't have anything to do with what happened at the country club tonight, would it? I have no idea what you're talking about, Mike. I'm just a concerned citizen reporting illegally parked vehicles. By 3 a.m, everything was ready. The evidence package for Sabrina would be delivered by 10 a.m. I'd already submitted the paperwork to freeze our joint accounts, citing documented misuse of funds. My lawyer would receive copies of everything first thing Monday morning. But the most important part of my plan was yet to come. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my leather chair, staring out the window at the house I'd worked 18 years to afford. In a few hours, Danielle would come home, probably expecting to find me broken and begging for forgiveness. Instead, she was going to discover that her boring, predictable husband had just outmaneuvered her in ways she'd never see coming. The bourbon burned going down, but not as much as the betrayal burned in my chest. 18 years of marriage. 18 years of building a life together, supporting her dreams, celebrating her successes, and she'd thrown it all away for a few afternoons at expensive hotels with her best friend's husband. My phone buzzed with another text from Danielle. Victor, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I deleted it without responding and poured another bourbon. The talking was over. Now it was time for consequences. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of my phone exploding with notifications. 17 new voicemails, 43 text messages, and one very interesting email from the security company that monitored our joint accounts. Account access suspended pending investigation of disputed transactions. The automated message read, "Please contact customer service for resolution." Perfect. The freeze had gone through exactly as planned. I made coffee and scrolled through the messages while the sun rose over our perfectly manicured suburban neighborhood. Most were from friends and acquaintances who'd witnessed last night's scene, ranging from concerned to curious to downright gleeful. Apparently, my public revelation had become the talk of Westfield overnight, but the most interesting messages were from Sabrina Lane. Victor, I need to speak with you immediately. Please call me. Sent at 2:17 a.m. I got your package. We need to talk, now. Sent at 8:23 a.m. That bastard is gone. Thank you. Sent at 8:45 a.m. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when I heard Danielle's BMW pull into the driveway. She'd been gone all night, probably at Greg's house trying to figure out damage control. Or maybe at a hotel, since I suspected Greg was no longer welcome in his own home. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Victor! Her voice echoed through the house like a fire alarm. Victor! Get down here right now! I took my time finishing my coffee and checking my emails. Let her wait. Let her stew in whatever panic had driven her home at 9 a.m, looking like she'd slept in her car. When I finally walked into the living room, Danielle was pacing like a caged animal. Her red dress from last night was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, her perfectly styled hair looking like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. What the hell did you do? she demanded, spinning to face me. Our accounts are frozen. I can't access any of our credit cards. And Sabrina… She stopped, her face going pale. Oh God, what did you send Sabrina? I sent her the truth, I said calmly, settling into my favorite armchair. Something I probably should have done weeks ago. What truth? Victor, I don't know what you think you know, but… Tuesday, September 15th. Marriott downtown, room 1247. Charged to our joint visa. You told me you were visiting your sick aunt in Connecticut. Danielle's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Thursday, September 24th. Four Seasons, lunch at the rooftop restaurant. $237 for what you claimed was a client meeting. Except your calendar showed no clients that day, and Greg Lane's assistant confirmed he was out of the office for a property inspection at the exact same time. Victor, you don't understand. October 2nd, Ritz-Carlton, champagne and strawberries charged to room service. Our anniversary, Danielle. You spent our anniversary in a hotel room with Greg Lane while I waited at home with dinner reservations you never showed up for. She sank onto the couch like someone had cut her strings. How long have you known? 3 weeks. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to consult with lawyers and accountants. Long enough to make sure that when this marriage ends, you don't get to walk away with half of everything while leaving me with the humiliation. Victor, please. It's not what you think. Greg and I, we never meant for it to happen. It just what? Just happened? You just accidentally fell into bed with your best friend's husband? You just accidentally used our joint credit cards to finance your affair? You just accidentally stood up at a public event last night and announced your intention to divorce me? Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. The woman crying on my couch was a stranger. The Danielle I'd married wouldn't have done this. The Danielle I'd loved wouldn't have betrayed not just me, but Sabrina, who'd been nothing but loyal and supportive for years. The accounts are frozen, I continued in the same calm tone. The house is in my name only, purchased before our marriage with my inheritance. Your car is leased through the business account, which I've already contacted about terminating early. Your credit cards were all joint accounts tied to my credit, which means they're suspended pending the separation proceedings. Separation proceedings. The words came out as a whisper. Did you think I was going to fight for a marriage you publicly announced was over? Did you think I was going to beg you to choose me over Greg? Victor, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. No. I stood up, looking down at the woman who'd once been the center of my world. We can't. Because this wasn't a mistake, Danielle. This was a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to betray Sabrina. You chose to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Sabrina Lane's name. I need to take this, I said, answering the call. Hello, Sabrina. Victor, I'm so sorry. Her voice was raw from crying. I had no idea. The photos, the receipts, the timeline. I confronted Greg this morning and he admitted everything. He's gone. I threw him out. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. No, you're not. There was a bitter laugh in her voice. You planned this perfectly. You could have told me privately, but you chose to expose them publicly. You wanted everyone to see. She was right. I could have handled this quietly, privately. But Danielle had chosen to make our marriage a public spectacle, announcing her intention to divorce me in front of 200 people, like it was something to celebrate. They made it public, I said. I just made it honest. I'm filing for divorce today. I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this. You were as much a victim as I was. After hanging up, I looked at Danielle, who'd been listening to every word. Sabrina's filing for divorce, I said, which means Greg's about to lose half of everything he owns. His business, his house, his assets, all because he couldn't keep his hands off his wife's best friend. Victor, please, you need to leave. This is my house too. No, it's not. Check the deed. Check the mortgage documents. This house was purchased with my inheritance before we were married. You have no legal claim to it. Where am I supposed to go? I walked to the front door and opened it. I don't know, Danielle. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to celebrate your divorce at a public event. She stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Then she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. This isn't over, Victor. Yes, I said quietly. It is. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I was alone in the house I'd worked so hard to build. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The next 2 weeks played out like a masterclass in social destruction. I didn't have to do much, just let the truth spread through Westfield's gossip network like wildfire through dry grass. Melissa Chan's Instagram account became ground zero for the fallout. She'd captured Danielle's toast, my response, and Sabrina's subsequent meltdown in a series of videos that went viral within our social circle. The comments section was brutal. I always knew something was off about Danielle. Poor Victor, he deserves so much better. Can you imagine betraying your best friend like that? Greg Lane is such a sleaze. I never trusted him. The professional consequences came swift and merciless. Danielle's event planning business had been built on connections within our social network, the same network that was now treating her like a pariah. 3 major clients canceled within a week. The country club revoked her preferred vendor status. The charity board she'd served on for 5 years asked for her resignation. I watched it all unfold from my office downtown, where I continued negotiating commercial leases like nothing had happened. My colleagues were professional enough not to pry, though I caught a few sympathetic looks and received several invitations to grab drinks after work. "You're handling this remarkably well," said Janice Harper, my office manager, as she delivered the day's contracts for review. "Most men would be falling apart by now." "Most men don't have 18 years to prepare for disappointment," I replied, not looking up from the lease agreement I was reviewing. Still, what she did was awful. Everyone's talking about it. That was the thing about small suburban communities. Scandal traveled faster than gossip, and betrayal was the kind of entertainment people couldn't resist discussing. Danielle had wanted attention, wanted to be the center of conversation. She'd gotten her wish, just not in the way she'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text from Big Mike. "Package delivered. Red Porsche is enjoying its extended vacation at City Impound. Heard the owner tried to report it stolen, but the tow was legitimate. Shame about those accumulating storage fees." I smiled and typed back, "Terrible shame indeed. Thanks for being such a good citizen." Greg Lane was discovering that reputation mattered in the real estate business. When word spread about his affair, and more importantly, about his role in destroying 2 marriages, several of his business partners began distancing themselves. Not because they were moral crusaders, but because scandal was bad for business in a community where personal relationships drove professional success. The final piece of my social strategy came during Danielle's last major event before her business completely collapsed, a charity fundraiser for the children's hospital that she'd been planning for 6 months. I'd bought a ticket weeks earlier, back when I was still playing the role of supportive husband. Now I attended as something else entirely. The event was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the same venue where Danielle and I had celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. She'd transformed it into an elegant autumn wonderland, with golden lighting and carefully arranged centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I arrived fashionably late, wearing my best suit and carrying a small gift bag. Danielle spotted me immediately from across the room, her face going pale beneath her professional smile. "Victor," she said, approaching me near the silent auction tables. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied cheerfully. "You've worked so hard on this event. It would be a shame not to support such an important cause." She looked confused, Suspicious. What are you doing here? I brought you something. I handed her the gift bag. A little token of appreciation for all your hard work. Inside the bag was a USB drive and a note. For the sound system. Thought you might want to share some behind-the-scenes moments with your guests. Danielle's hands were shaking as she read the note. What is this? Just some audio I thought might be interesting. You and Greg discussing your plans, your thoughts about me, about Sabrina, about how easy it was to fool everyone. I recorded it 3 weeks ago when you thought I was out of town on business. The color drained from her face completely. You wouldn't. I wouldn't what? Share the truth? Isn't that what you wanted? Honesty, transparency, a fresh start? Victor, please. There are important people here. Donors, clients. I know. That's what makes it perfect. I walked away, leaving her standing there with the USB drive in her trembling hands. I didn't need to stay to see what happened next. I'd planted the seed of fear, and knowing Danielle's paranoid nature, she'd spend the entire evening wondering if I'd actually gone through with it. I hadn't, of course. The USB drive contained nothing but empty files. But Danielle didn't know that. She'd spend the next 4 hours in a state of panic, jumping every time the microphone crackled, holding her breath every time someone approached the sound booth. The psychological torture was far more satisfying than any public humiliation could have been. By the time I got home that night, my phone had 3 voicemails from Danielle, each one more desperate than the last. Victor, please call me. We need to talk about this. I know you're angry, but this has gone far enough. Please don't do this. I'm begging you. Please. I'll do anything. I deleted them all without responding and poured myself a bourbon. Tomorrow would bring new consequences, new revelations of just how thoroughly I documented her betrayal. But tonight, I was content to sit in my house, and watch the empire she'd built crumble one social connection at a time. The best part was that I hadn't had to lie, cheat, or break any laws. I'd simply allowed the truth to do what truth does best, destroy the lies that people build their lives on. 3 weeks after the country club incident, Danielle and Greg made their last desperate play. They'd apparently spent the time since their respective separations plotting together, because they approached me with the kind of coordinated strategy that reeked of desperation and poor legal advice. I was leaving my office on a Thursday evening when they cornered me in the parking garage. Danielle looked haggard, her usually perfect appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd been surviving on stress and caffeine. Greg looked worse, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face bearing the kind of stubble that suggested he'd been sleeping in his car. Victor, we need to talk, Danielle said, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar like some kind of suburban ninja. I have nothing to say to either of you, I replied, continuing toward my car. Yes, you do, Greg said, moving to block my path, because what you did was illegal, and we have proof. I stopped walking and looked at him with the kind of calm interest I usually reserved for reviewing commercial contracts. Illegal? That's interesting. Please, elaborate. The account freeze, Danielle said, her voice shaking with either fear or rage. You had no right to cut off my access to our joint funds. That's financial abuse, and my lawyer says— Your lawyer says what exactly? I interrupted. That using joint credit cards to finance an extramarital affair isn't grounds for freezing those accounts? That I should have continued funding your hotel rooms and romantic dinners while you destroyed our marriage? You can't prove that's what the charges were for, Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd saved from Mrs. Lipman's surveillance hobby. Really? Because I have time-stamped photographs of you two entering the Marriott at 2:15 p.m. on September 15th, the same day our joint visa was charged for room service and champagne. Would you like me to show these to your business partners, Greg? I'm sure they'd be fascinated. Greg's face went ashen. You son of a— Careful, I said quietly. We're in a public place with security cameras. Threatening me would be unwise. This isn't over, Danielle said, tears streaming down her face. I'll fight you in court. I'll take everything you have. With what money? Your business is bankrupt. Your credit is destroyed. Your legal fees alone will cost more than you can afford. I looked between them, these two people who'd once been central to my life and were now nothing more than cautionary tales. But please, feel free to try. I have 18 years of financial records, 3 weeks of documented evidence, and a legal team that specializes in protecting assets from fraudulent claims. Fraudulent? Greg stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. You manipulative bastard, you planned this whole thing. I planned to protect myself when I discovered my wife was having an affair with her best friend's husband, I said. If that makes me manipulative, then I'll wear that label proudly. We never meant for it to happen, Danielle whispered. It just... Stop. The word came out harder than I'd intended. Don't insult what little intelligence I have left by pretending this was some romantic accident. You made choices. Both of you. You chose to betray your spouses. You chose to lie to your friends. You chose to use my money to finance your affair. And when you got caught, you chose to try to destroy me rather than accept responsibility. I walked around Greg toward my car. The difference between us is that I made better choices. I chose to gather evidence before acting. I chose to protect my assets before filing for separation. I chose to let the truth speak for itself, rather than trying to cover it up with more lies. Victor, please, Danielle called after me. Can't we at least try to end this civilly? I turned back to look at her one last time. This woman I'd loved for 18 years. This woman I'd supported through career changes and family losses and all the small crises that make up a life together. This woman who'd stood on a stage 3 weeks ago and announced her intention to divorce me like it was cause for celebration. You ended it civilly when you toasted your own divorce in front of 200 people, I said. Everything that's happened since then has just been the consequences of that choice. I got in my car and drove away, leaving them standing in the parking garage like the ruins of a life I'd once thought was permanent. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final act to this drama, one last scene that would bring everything full circle. The next evening, I attended the monthly meeting of the Westfield Business Association, a gathering of local professionals that both Greg and I had belonged to for years. I'd called ahead to request a spot on the agenda to address ethical business practices in our community. Greg was there, sitting in the back row like he was hoping to become invisible. When my name was called, I walked to the front of the room and looked out at 43 of Westfield's most influential business owners. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, I want to talk about reputation, about trust, about the importance of personal integrity in professional relationships. I spent the next 10 minutes delivering a presentation about ethics in business, about how personal behavior impacts professional credibility, about the importance of maintaining community standards. I never mentioned names. I never made accusations. I simply laid out the principles that most of these people already believed in. But everyone in the room knew exactly what I was talking about, and more importantly, everyone knew exactly who I was talking about. When I finished, the applause was polite but pointed. Several people came up afterward to shake my hand and offer their support. Greg slipped out during the applause, but not before I saw the look of defeat on his face. He understood, finally, that this wasn't just about a divorce or a broken marriage. This was about consequences. This was about accountability. This was about learning that actions have prices, and sometimes those prices are higher than you can afford to pay. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness. That would take time to rebuild. But peace. The satisfaction of knowing that I'd handled the worst betrayal of my life with dignity, intelligence, and strategic thinking. Danielle and Greg had destroyed 2 marriages, betrayed 2 friends, and shattered a social circle that had taken years to build. But in the end, they'd destroyed themselves more thoroughly than I ever could have. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes the best victory is walking away with your integrity intact. 6 months later, I was sitting in my backyard on a warm Saturday afternoon when Sabrina Lane knocked on my front door. I'd seen her around town a few times since the divorce proceedings had finalized, but we'd never spoken beyond polite nods of acknowledgement. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said when I answered the door. "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For having the courage to tell the truth when I couldn't see it myself." She looked older, but stronger somehow. The kind of strength that comes from surviving something you never thought you could survive. "My divorce was finalized last week. I got the house, half the business assets, and full custody of the kids. I'm glad things worked out for you. Greg's living in a studio apartment across town. His business partners bought him out for pennies on the dollar after the scandal broke. Turns out, reputation really does matter in real estate." We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd been collateral damage in someone else's selfish choices. "What about Danielle?" Sabrina asked. "She moved back to her mother's house in Ohio. Her business folded completely. Last I heard, she was working as an assistant at a small event planning company, trying to rebuild her career from scratch. Do you ever regret it? The way you handled everything?" I thought about that for a long moment. Did I regret exposing their affair so publicly? Did I regret the calculated way I dismantled their lives piece by piece? "No," I said finally. "They made their choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences." Sabrina nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "Victor? For what it's worth, I think you're a better man than either of them deserved." After she left, I went back to my backyard and poured myself a bourbon. The same brand I'd been drinking the night I'd discovered the truth about my marriage. The same brand I'd been drinking when I'd planned my response. I raised the glass toward the setting sun and made a toast of my own. "To new beginnings," I said quietly. "To truth, to consequences, and to the kind of justice that doesn't require a courtroom." I drank the bourbon slowly, savoring the burn, thinking about the life I was building from the ashes of the one that had been destroyed. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest. It was mine, and it was built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by lies or betrayal or the selfish actions of people who'd forgotten the meaning of loyalty. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Children playing in backyards, couples talking on their front porches. The ordinary sounds of ordinary lives lived by ordinary people who kept their promises and honored their commitments. I finished my bourbon and went inside to start dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities for happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's choices. But tonight, I was content to sit in the house I'd earned, drinking bourbon I'd paid for, surrounded by the peace that comes from knowing you've faced the worst betrayal of your life and emerged with your dignity intact. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.